The crack of a rifle echoed across the dusty plains of Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876, as Eleanor Lawson watched her father's last remaining cattle scatter into the distance. Clutching the weapon that had never felt right in her hands, she dropped to her knees in the tall grass, hot tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. She was failing again, just as everyone said she would. "Pa should have sold this worthless land when Ma died," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. At 22, Eleanor had spent the last 3 years since her mother's passing trying to keep their small ranch afloat, while her father drank himself into an early grave. Now that he too was gone, taken by pneumonia during the harsh winter, she was left with nothing but debt, a crumbling homestead, and livestock she couldn't control. The town of Willow Creek had already written her off. "Poor Eleanor," they whispered at her father's funeral. "She'll have to sell. A woman can't run a ranch alone." Even the banker, Mr. Peterson, had offered his kindest advice. "Miss Lawson, you'd best consider marriage or selling before you starve." His eyes had lingered too long on the deed to her land when he said it. Eleanor rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her threadbare skirt. She'd have to round up those cattle before nightfall, or lose what little she had left. The distant silhouette of a rider appeared on the horizon, and Eleanor narrowed her eyes against the setting sun. Nobody visited Lawson Ranch these days, except creditors or vultures eyeing her father's land. As the rider drew closer, she recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive hat of Jacob Grayson, whose sprawling ranch bordered her property to the north. He was a man of few words and many legends. Some said he'd been a gunslinger before settling in Wyoming. Others claimed he'd made his fortune in the gold fields of California. All Eleanor knew was that he rarely came to town, and when he did, people treated him with a mixture of respect and wariness. Jacob slowed his chestnut stallion to a walk as he approached. "Miss Lawson," he called, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, weathered by years under the open sky. "Mr. Grayson," Eleanor replied, gripping her rifle tighter, though she knew she had no real skill with it. "What brings you to my property?" He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Up close, she could see the lines etched around his eyes, not from age, for he couldn't be past his early 30s, but from squinting against sun and wind. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw. "Your cattle are scattered halfway to my northern pasture," he said, not unkindly. "Thought you might need help rounding them up." Eleanor stiffened. She didn't need charity, especially not from a man who probably saw her as just another piece of land to acquire. "I can manage my own stock, Mr. Grayson." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "Never said you couldn't, but daylight's wasting, and those beeves of yours look mighty determined to find new grazing." Before she could protest further, he was back in the saddle. "You riding or walking, Miss Lawson?" Eleanor hesitated. Her pride demanded she refuse his help, but practicality won out. She couldn't afford to lose a single head of cattle. "I'll get my horse." As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Eleanor rode alongside Jacob, guiding her small herd back toward the Lawson corral. She'd expected him to take over, to treat her like the incompetent woman everyone believed her to be. Instead, he gave quiet directions, showing her how to position herself to turn the stubborn cattle. "You've got good instincts," he remarked as they pushed the last stray through the gate. "Just need confidence in the saddle." Eleanor secured the gate latch, avoiding his gaze. "Confidence doesn't feed cattle or pay debts, Mr. Grayson." "No," he agreed, "but it might keep folks from taking advantage of a woman they think can't stand her ground." He paused, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Word is, Peterson's looking to foreclose on your place." "People talk too much in this town," she said bitterly. "That they do." Jacob removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Miss Lawson, I've got a proposition for you. My foreman just left for California. His wife's ailing mother needed him. I need someone who knows the land and can learn quick." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job as your foreman?" "Assistant foreman to start," he corrected. "I've seen how you handled yourself today. You've got grit, Miss Lawson, whatever the townsfolk might say." "And what about my ranch?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Keep it. Work for me during the day. Tend your place morning and night. Once you've earned enough to get your debts squared away, you can decide if you want to stay on or build up your own operation again." He replaced his hat. "Fair wage for fair work. Nothing more, nothing less." Eleanor studied his face, searching for deceit or ulterior motives. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I'll consider it, Mr. Grayson." "Jacob," he said, mounting his horse, "if we're going to work together, you might as well use my name." As he rode away, the setting sun silhouetting his broad shoulders, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Perhaps there was a way to save her father's legacy after all, even if it meant swallowing her pride and accepting help from a man who saw something in her that no one else did. The next morning, Eleanor rose before dawn, as she always did. The small mirror in her bedroom reflected a face she barely recognized anymore, hollow-cheeked from too many missed meals, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights spent worrying about bills. She splashed cold water on her face from the basin, then braided her long red hair with practiced fingers. Today would be different. Today, she was going to accept Jacob Grayson's offer. She donned her only pair of sturdy trousers, usually reserved for the most demanding ranch work, and tucked in a faded cotton shirt. Her mother would have been scandalized to see her dressed this way, heading off to work for a bachelor, but Eleanor had stopped worrying about propriety when survival became her primary concern. After tending to her own meager stock, 3 milk cows, 2 oxen, and the dozen cattle Jacob had helped round up yesterday, she saddled her mare, Penny, and rode toward the Grayson ranch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching summer day. The Grayson homestead came into view as she crested a small rise. Unlike her own dilapidated property, his place spoke of prosperity and careful stewardship. A 2-story house stood proudly amid several well-maintained outbuildings. Neat fences enclosed corrals where horses grazed, and beyond them stretched verdant pastures dotted with healthy cattle. Jacob emerged from the barn as she approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You came," he said simply, as though he'd expected nothing less. "I did," Eleanor replied, dismounting. "But I have conditions." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm listening." "I work from sunrise until 4 o'clock. That gives me time to tend to my place in the evenings. Sundays I don't work at all." She took a breath. "And I want to learn everything, not just what you think a woman should know about ranching." Jacob crossed his arms, considering her for a moment. "Fair enough, but I have conditions too. You take orders when I give them, no arguing in front of the hands. You eat meals here you're too thin as it is. And you accept help with your place when you need it." Eleanor bristled at the comment about her appearance, but nodded curtly. "Agreed. Then you'd best meet the crew." He gestured toward the bunkhouse, where several men were emerging for the day's work. "They might take some convincing that you belong here." The introduction to Jacob's ranch hands went about as well as Eleanor had expected. Most of the men regarded her with poorly disguised skepticism. A few muttered under their breath. Only the cook, an elderly Mexican man named Manuel, offered a genuine welcome. "Don't mind them." "Señorita," he said as he handed her a cup of strong coffee. "They will learn, as the patron has learned, that a woman's strength is different, but no less valuable." The boss gone soft in the head? Eleanor overheard one cowhand asking another as they prepared to ride out. "Hiring a slip of a girl who couldn't even keep her daddy's place running?" "Dunno, Pete," his companion replied. "But Grayson ain't known for making poor decisions. Must see something in her." "Or looking to see something of her?" Pete snickered. "Pretty little thing, for all she dresses like a man." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but before she could respond, Jacob's voice cut through the murmurs. "Miss Lawson knows this land as well as any of you," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And she's here because I need someone with brains as well as writing skills. Anyone who can't show her proper respect can collect their wages and find work elsewhere." The men fell silent, chastened by their employer's words. Jacob turned to Eleanor. "We're moving cattle to the south pasture today. Stay close. Watch what we do." That first day was the hardest physical labor Eleanor had ever endured. Though she'd worked her father's ranch alone, the scale of Jacob's operation dwarfed anything she was accustomed to. By midday, her muscles screamed in protest, and sweat soaked her clothes. During the brief break for the noon meal, she collapsed in the shade of a cottonwood, too exhausted even to eat the food Manuel had packed. Jacob settled beside her, offering his canteen. "You're doing better than most greenhorns on their first day," he remarked as she drank deeply. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" she asked, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Just a fact." He studied her for a moment. "Why are you so determined to keep that ranch, Eleanor? You could sell it. Start fresh somewhere else." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her pause. "It's all I have left of them," she finally said. "My parents. They built that place from nothing. If I lose it, it's like losing them all over again." Jacob nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My father died defending our first homestead in Kansas. Raiders took everything, but my mother was determined to start over. She taught me that land is just dirt unless you make something of it." He stood, offering her a hand up. "Your parents would be proud of how hard you're fighting." Eleanor took his hand, surprised by the unexpected gentleness in his calloused grip. "How do you know? You never met them?" "Because I see their daughter," he said simply, before turning to call the men back to work. By the end of that first week, Eleanor had earned, if not the respect, at least the grudging acceptance of most of Jacob's ranch hands. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, but she found herself looking forward to the daily ride to the Grayson ranch. Jacob proved to be a patient teacher, showing her the efficient methods his operation used for everything from branding calves to mending fences. He never talked down to her or suggested certain tasks were beyond her capabilities. Instead, he demonstrated, explained, and then stepped back to let her try for herself. "You need to widen your stance," he instructed as she practiced roping a wooden calf head he'd set up for training. "Plant your feet like you're expecting a gust of wind to try and blow you over." Eleanor adjusted her position, concentrating on the feel of the lariat in her hands. She'd watched him make it look effortless, a fluid motion that sent the rope sailing through the air to land precisely where he intended. Her own attempts had been embarrassingly inaccurate. "Now, focus on your target, not on the rope," Jacob continued, standing close enough that she could smell the leather and sunshine scent of him. "The rope goes where your eyes tell it to." She inhaled deeply, fixed her gaze on the wooden target, and let the lariat fly. To her amazement, the loop settled neatly over the calf's head. "I did it!" she exclaimed, turning to Jacob with unguarded delight. The smile that broke across his face transformed his features, softening the hard lines and lighting his eyes. "Never doubted you would," he said. "Now do it again, 10 more times, until your arms remember what your brain just learned." As the summer progressed, Eleanor developed a routine. She rose before dawn to tend her own small herd, rode to the Grayson ranch as the sun crested the horizon, worked alongside Jacob and his men until mid-afternoon, then returned home to maintain her property. The bank had grudgingly extended her loan after Jacob spoke to Mr. Peterson, though the interest rate remained punishingly high. What little free time she had was spent repairing her home, patching the roof, fixing broken windows, and strengthening the corrals. Often, she would look up from her work to find one or two of Jacob's hands had ridden over after their day's work to help. They never said much, just pitched in until the job was done, then tipped their hats and rode back to the Grayson place. "Did you send them?" she asked Jacob one morning as they rode the boundary line, checking for breaks in the fence. "Send who?" he asked, though the slight quirk of his lips told her he knew exactly what she meant. "Your men. They've been helping at my place in the evenings." Jacob shrugged, leaning down from his saddle to examine a loose fence post. "Can't control what my hands do on their own time." "Jacob," she pressed, "I need to know if this is charity." He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "It's respect, Eleanor. You've earned it. They see how hard you work, how much you care about that land of yours. Ranch folk help their neighbors, that's all there is to it." As they continued their ride, Eleanor noticed how the hands had stopped snickering when she approached. Instead, they asked her opinion on the best grazing spots or the condition of certain animals. Pete, who had been the most vocal critic, had even apologized after she spotted a sick calf he'd missed during a routine check. "You've got a good eye, Miss Lawson," he'd admitted gruffly. "Saved us losing that little feller." The change extended to town as well. The first time Eleanor rode into Willow Creek after working at the Grayson Ranch for a month, she noticed the difference immediately. Shopkeepers who had previously watched her with pity now greeted her with respect. Women who had whispered behind their hands now invited her to join their conversations. "Heard you're working for Grayson," the general store owner remarked as he filled her order. "Man doesn't hire just anybody." "I'm learning a lot," Eleanor replied neutrally, unwilling to admit how much she enjoyed her days at the neighboring ranch. "He's a good man," the storekeeper continued, weighing out sugar for her. "Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. Folks wondered why he never took a wife. Big place like that needs a woman's touch." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I wouldn't know about that. We have a strictly professional arrangement." The man's knowing smile suggested he didn't entirely believe her. "Of course, Miss Lawson. That'll be $1.35. As summer gave way to autumn, Eleanor's feelings toward Jacob grew increasingly complicated. She told herself her quickened pulse when he rode near was simply appreciation for a mentor. The way she found herself watching his hands as he demonstrated a new skill was merely the focus of a dedicated student. And if she sometimes dreamed of those same hands caressing her face instead of braiding leather or mending tack, well, that was her secret to keep. For his part, Jacob remained a perfect gentleman, though Eleanor occasionally caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He began finding reasons for them to work alone together, checking remote sections of the ranch, selecting cattle for market, planning improvements for the coming year. During these times, their conversations deepened beyond ranch work. Eleanor learned that Jacob had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start after losing his brother in battle. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, the innovations he hoped to implement, the legacy he wanted to build. In turn, she shared memories of her mother teaching her to read by lamplight, of her father showing her how to gentle a horse when she was just a girl. She confessed her fears of failure, of losing everything her parents had worked for. "Sometimes I think they were wrong to leave it all to me," she admitted one crisp October afternoon as they sat by a stream, resting their horses. "My father had a brother in St. Louis who has sons. Maybe the ranch should have gone to them." Jacob skipped a stone across the water's surface. "Do these cousins know the first thing about ranching?" "No," Eleanor smiled faintly. "Uncle Henry is a banker. His sons are studying law." "Then your father made the right choice." Jacob's voice was firm. "He left the land to someone who loves it, who understands it. Not someone who'd sell it to the highest bidder without a second thought." His confidence in her warmed Eleanor more than the autumn sun. "I still might lose it," she reminded him. "The bank—" "You won't lose it," Jacob interrupted. "Your herd is growing. The improvements you've made to the property have increased its value, and you've earned enough working for me to make your next payment with some to spare." It was true. The wage Jacob paid her was generous, and she'd been careful with every penny. For the first time since her father's death, Eleanor felt financially secure. "I've been thinking," Jacob said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Winter's coming. Your place gets hit hard by the north wind. Might be better to move your cattle in with mine until spring. Save on feed, combine our resources." Eleanor stiffened slightly. "I can manage my own stock." Jacob sighed. "I know you can. But why struggle alone when combining our herds makes sense? You'd still own your cattle, still make all decisions about them. They'd just share grazing and shelter with mine." She wanted to refuse out of pride, but his logic was sound. Her small herd would fare better with the protection of Jacob's larger operation during the harsh Wyoming winter. "I'll think about it," she conceded. He smiled, the rare full smile that transformed his weathered face and made her heart beat faster. "That's all I ask." As they rode back to the ranch, side by side in the comfortable silence, Eleanor realized how much her life had changed in just a few months. The despair that had gripped her after her father's death had given way to cautious optimism. She was stronger now, more confident in her abilities. And much of that change she owed to the quiet man riding beside her, who had seen value in her when everyone else saw only failure. The first snow fell in early November, earlier than usual and heavier than expected. Eleanor woke to a world transformed, blanched white under 6 inches of snow, with more falling steadily. After struggling through her morning chores, she made the difficult decision to accept Jacob's offer to combine their herds for the winter. Bundled against the biting cold, she rode to the Grayson ranch, the journey taking twice as long as usual in the treacherous conditions. When she arrived, stamping snow from her boots on the porch of the main house, Jacob opened the door before she could knock. "Was about to ride out to check on you," he said, ushering her inside. "Storm's getting worse." The warmth of his home enveloped her, along with the rich aroma of coffee and something baking. Eleanor had never been inside his house before, their interactions limited to the barn, the range, or occasionally the bunkhouse dining area. Now she stood dripping melted snow onto his floor, taking in the unexpectedly comfortable furnishings. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with well-worn leather chairs arranged before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that appeared well-read. The furniture was sturdy but tasteful, the floors covered with colorful woven rugs. "It's not what I expected," Eleanor admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "What did you expect? Bearskin rugs and antlers everywhere?" Jacob's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Something less homey," she said, warming her hands on the mug. He shrugged. "My mother had strong opinions about comfortable living. Said there was no point in working yourself to death if you couldn't enjoy your home at day's end. She sounds like a wise woman. She was." A shadow crossed his face. "She passed 5 years ago. Influenza." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry. I know how that loss feels." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "I know you do." Then, clearing his throat, he moved toward a desk in the corner. "Now, about your cattle. I sent some men out at first light to bring them in. Hope that's all right." "That's actually why I came," Eleanor said, following him. "I've decided to take you up on your offer." "Just until spring." Relief flickered across his features. "Good. We've got room in the south barn for your stock. They'll be well cared for." They spent the next hour planning the details of the arrangement, with Jacob insisting Eleanor retain full ownership and control of her animals. As the snow continued to fall outside, Manuel appeared with a tray of fresh baked bread and stew. "You will stay for lunch, Miss Eleanor," he said, his tone making it clear this was not a question. No one should ride in such weather with an empty stomach. Lunch extended into the afternoon as the storm intensified. Jacob brought out a chessboard, and they played before the fire while the wind howled outside. Eleanor discovered he was a patient but formidable opponent, willing to teach her better strategies without letting her win. "Checkmate," he announced after their third game, having backed her king into an inescapable corner. "I'm improving," Eleanor noted, studying the board to understand where she'd gone wrong. "First game took you 12 moves, this one took 26. Jacob's laugh was warm. "You're counting?" "I count everything," she admitted. "Cattle, dollars, fence posts. It's how I keep track of progress." "And are you making progress, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice softer now. "With the ranch, I mean?" She considered the question seriously. "Yes," she finally said. "Thanks in large part to you. I've learned more in these past months than in all the years working alongside my father." "Your father taught you the basics," Jacob said, resetting the chess pieces. "But sometimes we need someone outside our family to push us beyond what's familiar." As afternoon faded into evening, the storm showed no signs of abating. Jacob peered out the window at the accumulating snow, now nearly knee-deep and drifting higher against the buildings. "You can't ride back tonight," he said decisively. "It's too dangerous." Eleanor knew he was right, but the impropriety of staying overnight at a bachelor's home sent a flutter of anxiety through her. "What will people say?" "That you had the good sense not to freeze to death in a blizzard," Jacob replied dryly. "Besides, Manuel and his wife live in the attached quarters. Your reputation will remain intact." After a simple but delicious dinner prepared by Manuel, Jacob showed Eleanor to a guest room on the second floor. "My mother's room," he explained, lighting the lamp on the bedside table. "Everything's clean. Rosa Manuel's wife keeps it ready for visitors." The room was clearly feminine, with delicate floral wallpaper and a quilt pieced in soft blues and greens covering the high bed. A dressing table with an oval mirror stood in one corner, and lace curtains framed the frost-edged windows. "It's lovely," Eleanor said, genuinely touched that he would offer her this personal space. "There are night clothes in the chest," Jacob said, moving toward the door. "They might be a bit large, but they're clean. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall." After he left, Eleanor explored the room, running her fingers over the carved wooden bed frame and examining the few personal items that remained of Jacob's mother: a silver hairbrush, a small porcelain box, a faded daguerreotype of a handsome woman with Jacob's same intense eyes. She changed into one of the nightgowns from the chest, soft with age and smelling faintly of lavender. Climbing into the high bed, she extinguished the lamp and listened to the wind howling around the eaves. Despite the storm's fury, she felt strangely at peace, surrounded by the remnants of a mother's love in this house that had begun to feel almost as familiar as her own. The blizzard lasted 3 days, effectively trapping Eleanor at the Grayson ranch. During that time, she and Jacob fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. They spent mornings checking on the animals, ensuring all were fed and sheltered from the brutal weather. Afternoons were passed by the fire, playing chess or reading aloud from Jacob's extensive library. In the evenings, after Manuel and Rosa had retired to their quarters, they talked for hours about everything and nothing: childhood memories, hopes for the future, favorite seasons on the range. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, sipping whiskey from Jacob's private stock, Eleanor found herself studying his profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the way the firelight played across his features. "Why did you really hire me, Jacob?" she asked suddenly. "There must have been dozens of more qualified men you could have chosen." He turned to face her, the amber liquid in his glass catching the light as he swirled it thoughtfully. "I watched you for months after your father died," he admitted. "Saw you working that land alone, refusing to give up even when anyone else would have sold out." "You were watching me?" Eleanor wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned. "Not in a troubling way," he clarified quickly. "My property overlooks yours, remember? I'd see you out there at dawn, mending fences or moving cattle. Most evenings, too, working by lantern light." He took a sip of his whiskey. "You reminded me of my mother after my father died. Same determination, same pride." "So it was pity," Eleanor said, a hint of disappointment coloring her voice. "No." Jacob's response was immediate and firm. "It was admiration. And then, when I helped you round up those strays that day, I saw something more potential. You had all the instincts of a good rancher, but none of the training." He set down his glass. "I needed help. You needed income and experience. It seemed like a solution that would benefit us both." "And has it?" she asked softly. "Benefited you, I mean?" Jacob's gaze held hers, the intensity in his eyes making her breath catch. "More than I expected," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Far more." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Eleanor was acutely aware of how close they sat, of the way his hand rested just inches from hers on the arm of the chair. If she moved just slightly, their fingers would touch. Before she could decide whether to bridge that small but significant gap, a tremendous crash sounded from outside, followed by the panicked lowing of cattle. Jacob was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his coat. "Sounds like part of the barn roof might have collapsed under the snow," he said grimly. "Stay here where it's warm." "I'm coming with you," Eleanor insisted, already pulling on her boots. "Those are my cattle too." They rushed out into the biting cold, lanterns held high against the swirling snow. The south barn, where Eleanor's cattle had been housed, had indeed suffered a partial roof collapse under the weight of the accumulated snow. Ranch hands from the bunkhouse were already working to move the frightened animals to safety. For the next several hours, Eleanor worked alongside Jacob and his men, leading cattle to alternate shelter and helping to shore up the remaining structure to prevent further collapse. The work was exhausting and perilously cold, but she never once thought of retreating to the warmth of the house. By dawn, all the animals had been relocated, with miraculously no serious injuries. The men trudged back to the bunkhouse for much-needed rest, while Jacob and Eleanor made their way to the main house, wet, freezing, and bone-tired. "You should have stayed inside," Jacob chided gently as they stamped snow from their boots on the porch. "Your hands are like ice." "They're my responsibility too," Eleanor reminded him, teeth chattering as they entered the blessed warmth of the house. I couldn't just watch from the window. Jacob built up the fire, while Eleanor changed into dry clothes. When she returned to the main room, he had hot coffee waiting and had dragged a small settee close to the hearth. "Sit," he instructed, wrapping a thick quilt around her shoulders. "You're still shivering." Eleanor didn't protest, gratefully sinking into the cushions and extending her hands toward the fire. Jacob disappeared briefly, returning with 2 steaming mugs of coffee liberally laced with whiskey. "Drink," he said, pressing one into her hands. "Doctor's orders." She took a sip, the liquid burning pleasantly down her throat and spreading warmth through her chest. "Are you a doctor now?" "No, but I've treated enough cases of cold exposure to know the remedy." He settled beside her on the settee, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their spiked coffee and watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Eleanor was acutely aware of Jacob's presence beside her, of the solid strength of him just inches away. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. Not just tonight, but all of it. Taking a chance on me when no one else would." Jacob turned to look at her, his expression soft in the firelight. "Eleanor," he said, her name almost a caress on his lips. "You don't need to thank me for seeing what was always there." Later, Eleanor would never be sure who moved first. All she knew was that one moment they were looking at each other, and the next his lips were on hers, gentle but insistent. She responded without hesitation, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you showed up in those ridiculous trousers, determined to prove everyone wrong," he confessed. Eleanor laughed softly. "And I've wanted you to, though I'd never have admitted it." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I know we started as employer and employee, but that's not how I see you anymore, Eleanor. Not for a long time now." "How do you see me?" she asked, needing to hear the words. His eyes, warm and sincere, held hers. "As my partner, my equal, the woman I want beside me, in work and in life." Eleanor's heart swelled. All those months of telling herself her feelings for Jacob were simply gratitude or admiration had been self-deception. What she felt was deeper, truer, a love born of mutual respect and understanding. "People will talk," she warned, though she couldn't bring herself to care much about that anymore. "Let them," Jacob said with a small smile. "They've been talking about us since the day I hired you. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." The storm finally broke the following day, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-crystallized trees. After breakfast, Jacob hitched his strongest team to a sleigh and drove Eleanor back to her property to check on her house and remaining livestock. The small homestead had weathered the storm remarkably well, thanks to the repairs she'd made throughout the summer. The caretaker Jacob had sent to feed her animals reported all was well, though the chicken coop had required extra reinforcement against the weight of the snow. As they stood in her yard, surveying the property, Jacob took her gloved hand in his. "I meant what I said last night, Eleanor. I want you as my partner in every sense of the word." "Are you proposing Jacob Grayson?" she asked, her heart beating rapidly beneath her heavy coat. "Not yet," he replied with a smile. "When I do, it'll be proper with a ring and on one knee. But I wanted you to know my intentions are honorable and long-term." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Good, because I have no intention of being just a winter dalliance." His laugh, rich and warm, clouded in the cold air between them. "You could never be just anything, Eleanor Lawson." As winter settled firmly over Wyoming Territory, Eleanor's life took on a new rhythm. She continued working at the Grayson Ranch during the days, but her role had evolved from employee to partner. Jacob sought her opinion on ranch decisions, valued her insights on livestock management, and included her in his plans for spring planting and breeding. In the evenings, they alternated between her small homestead and his more spacious house, sharing meals and conversation. Their courtship progressed steadily, with Jacob showing her the same patience and respect in romance that he had in teaching her ranching skills. Word of their relationship spread quickly through Willow Creek. Most reactions were positive. The townspeople had seen Eleanor's transformation from struggling orphan to capable rancher and approved of the match. A few voices, particularly those who had coveted the Lawson property, were less enthusiastic. "Guess we know why Grayson took her under his wing," Eleanor overheard in the general store one afternoon. "Man's been alone too long, and she's got that prime Creekside property." Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, spoke up firmly. "Thomas Fuller, you should be ashamed. Mr. Grayson has more land than he can manage already, and Miss Lawson has proven herself quite capable. If they've found happiness together, we should be pleased for them." Eleanor shot the older woman a grateful smile. As she completed her purchases and prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "I knew your mother well," she said quietly. "She would be proud of the woman you've become, Eleanor, and I believe she would approve of Mr. Grayson. He has a good reputation and, more importantly, he looks at you the way a man should look at the woman he loves, with respect as well as affection." Those words stayed with Eleanor as she rode home, warming her more effectively than the winter sunshine. Her mother had always hoped Eleanor would find a partner who valued her mind as well as her heart, who would stand beside her rather than attempt to stand over her. Jacob was proving to be that man. He never tried to make decisions for her about her property or her future. Instead, he offered advice when asked, support when needed, and always treated her choices with respect, even when he disagreed. As February brought a brief thaw, Jacob suggested they ride to the far northern section of his property, where a natural hot spring bubbled up from the earth, creating a small, steaming pool surrounded by rocks. "It's one of my favorite places," he told her as they dismounted near the spring. "Not many people know about it." Eleanor approached the edge of the pool, marveling at the contrast between the snow-covered ground and the steaming water. "It's beautiful," she said, removing her gloves to test the temperature with her fingertips. The water was deliciously warm, a stark contrast to the chill air. Jacob spread a blanket on a dry patch of ground and unpacked a small meal from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a flask of hot coffee. As they ate, he told her about discovering the spring during his first winter on the ranch, when he'd gotten lost in a snowstorm and stumbled upon the saving warmth by accident. "I thought I might die that night," he admitted. "Finding this place felt like a miracle. Made me believe this land was where I was meant to be." When they had finished eating, Jacob grew unusually quiet, almost nervous. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I told you when the time came, I'd do this properly," he said, moving to kneel before her on the blanket. "Eleanor Lawson, these past months have shown me what I was missing in my life. You challenge me, you inspire me, and you make me laugh. I can't imagine my future without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a ring with a small but perfect diamond set in a band of gold. "This was my mother's. She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman who was as strong and determined as she was." His eyes, earnest and full of love, met Eleanor's. "Will you marry me?" Eleanor's vision blurred with tears as she looked at the man kneeling before her, this strong, quiet cowboy who had seen value in her when everyone else saw only failure, who had taught her to believe in herself again, and had given her the skills to save her family's legacy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her all along. When he rose to kiss her, Eleanor felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. They were married in April, as the first wildflowers began to carpet the prairie. The ceremony was held outdoors, on the boundary line between their two properties, symbolic of the union that would join not just their lives, but their lands as well. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Henderson and the ladies of the church sewing circle. Jacob, clean-shaven for the occasion, looked almost boyish in his new suit, his dark hair freshly trimmed, and his eyes never leaving Eleanor as she walked toward him on the arm of Manuel, who had proudly agreed to give her away. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even those who had once doubted Eleanor's ability to survive on her own. Mr. Peterson, the banker who had once suggested she sell her land, presented the couple with a silver serving tray and his sincere best wishes. "Never thought I'd see the day Jacob Grayson took a wife," he told Eleanor at the reception. Man turned down half the eligible women in the territory, Must be something special about you, Mrs. Grayson. There is, Jacob said, appearing at Eleanor's side and slipping an arm around her waist. She's the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met. Turned a failing ranch around through sheer grit and intelligence. Anne had a good teacher, Eleanor added, smiling up at her husband. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. Well, you two should do well together. Combining your operations makes good business sense. We're not combining them, Jacob corrected. Eleanor will continue to run her property independently. We'll cooperate, of course, but the Lawson Ranch stays in her name. The banker's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unusual. That's respect, Jacob said simply, and guided Eleanor away toward their other guests. Later, as the celebration continued under lantern light, with music and dancing on the packed earth of the ranch yard, Jacob pulled Eleanor away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. Happy Mrs. Grayson, he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Very, she assured him, resting her hands on his chest. Though I'm still getting used to the name. You could have kept Lawson, he reminded her. I wouldn't have minded. Eleanor shook her head. I wanted your name, but I'll keep my father's legacy alive through the ranch. Jacob kissed her forehead gently. Our children will know the story of both families, both legacies, how their grandfather Lawson built something from nothing, and how their mother was brave enough to fight for it when everyone said she couldn't. The mention of children sent a warm flutter through Eleanor's stomach. The thought of raising a family with Jacob, of small hands helping with ranch chores and little voices filling their home, was a future she eagerly anticipated. I love you, Jacob, she said, the words still new enough to send a thrill through her when she spoke them. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. His eyes, warm and full of promise, held hers. They said you were useless, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I knew from the first day you were my greatest treasure. As the seasons turned, Eleanor and Jacob settled into married life with the same determination they brought to ranching. They faced challenges together, a summer drought that threatened their crops, cattle rustlers who targeted their herds, a difficult first pregnancy that left Eleanor bedridden for weeks. Through it all, their partnership only strengthened. Jacob never wavered in his support of Eleanor's independent management of her family's ranch, even when it occasionally led to disagreements over methods or priorities. He respected her decisions and celebrated her successes as proudly as his own. For her part, Eleanor thrived with Jacob's steadfast belief in her abilities. Under her management, the Lawson Ranch prospered, eventually growing to rival the Grayson property in productivity and profit. The townsfolk who had once pitied her now sought her advice on livestock breeding and land management. Their first child, a son they named William after Eleanor's father, was born the following spring. He was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Jacob's mother. Both children grew up straddling the two properties, learning ranching skills from both parents and developing the same love for the land that had brought their parents together. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Jacob surprised Eleanor with a special gift, a new sign for the entrance to her property. Where the old, weathered Lawson Ranch marker had stood, a freshly painted sign now read, Lawson Grayson Ranch Est, 1872. I thought it was time we acknowledged what everyone already knows, he explained as they stood looking at the sign together. These two places, like us, are better together while still honoring their separate histories. Eleanor, holding 3-year-old Sarah on her hip, while 5-year-old William examined a grasshopper in the tall grass nearby, felt tears prick her eyes. It's perfect, she said, leaning against her husband's solid strength. 10 years after that snowy day when Jacob had first offered Eleanor a job, the Lawson Grayson Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the Wyoming Territory. Their innovative breeding programs and land management techniques drew visitors from as far away as Europe, eager to learn their methods. One evening, as they sat on the porch of what had once been Eleanor's small homestead, but had since been expanded into a comfortable family home, Jacob watched his wife rocking their newest addition, a surprise late in life, daughter they'd named Hope. Remember when we met? He asked, passing her a cup of tea. You were about ready to shoot me for trespassing. Eleanor laughed, the sound as captivating to him now as it had been then. I was desperate and afraid. You looked like just another man coming to tell me I couldn't manage on my own. And instead, I offered you a job," he recalled with a smile. "Best decision you ever made," she teased. Jacob reached over to stroke his sleeping daughter's cheek. "Second best," he corrected gently. "Asking you to marry me was the first." Eleanor's eyes, still as bright and determined as the day they had met, softened with love. Who would have thought that stubborn cowboy who rode onto my land that day would change my life so completely? "I knew," Jacob said simply. "From the moment I saw you standing there, rifle in hand, refusing to give up no matter what anyone said. I knew you were something special, Eleanor Lawson." "Even though they all said I was useless?" she asked with a smile. Jacob leaned over to kiss her softly, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. "You were never useless," he murmured against her lips. "You were always my greatest treasure, always will be." As the sun set over the rolling Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eleanor looked out over the land that had once seemed like an impossible burden and was now her greatest joy. The cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the sturdy barns and corrals, the fields ready for harvest, all of it represented not just survival, but triumph. And beside her sat the man who had seen her potential when everyone else saw only failure, who had given her the confidence to believe in herself again, who had loved her not in spite of her determination and independence, but because of it. "We built something good here," she said softly, looking out over their joined properties stretching to the horizon. "We did," Jacob agreed, taking her free hand in his. "Something that will last long after we're gone." In the distance, they could see William and Sarah racing their ponies across the meadow, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The next generation of Lawson Graysons, already showing the same love for the land and the same determination that had defined their parents. "Not bad for a woman everyone said couldn't run a ranch," Eleanor remarked with quiet pride. Jacob squeezed her hand. "Not bad at all, for the woman I always knew would be the heart and soul of the finest ranch in Wyoming Territory." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Eleanor rested her head against her husband's shoulder, their sleeping daughter cradled between them. The journey from that desperate day when Jacob had found her trying to round up straying cattle to this moment of contentment had been filled with challenges and triumphs, tears and laughter. But, through it all, his faith in her had never wavered, and in that steadfast belief, Eleanor had found not just a partner, but a love story greater than any she could have imagined, one built on respect, perseverance, and the courage to see value where others saw only limitations.